from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses. Clearly, China is our leading geopolitical challenge and a complicated one because obviously they're also our largest trading partner. And I think one thing that's bipartisan is no one doesn't think that China isn't our most strategic challenge. And certainly we all understand the gravity of China and competition as it relates to our own economy and our own national security interests. I know that we talked a lot about Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Donald Trump today. I believe that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have united our allies against aggressive authoritarian states. But I also think it's important, since we've talked so much about Trump and the Trump era, to compare the Biden-Harris record with the Donald Trump record as it relates to China. And of course, we here have a recent, a story by the Washington Post. I'm going to show a recent one as well about President Xi and China and John Bolton's claims, which I think are very credible, that somehow Donald Trump is working and had worked with President Xi to actually encourage election interference. Now, during a one-on-one meeting between President Xi and Trump, Donald Trump asked to buy more soybeans and wheat to help him actually win re-election, as John Bolton had noted and the Washington Post reported. And in fact, in that same meeting, Trump actually said that Democrats were the party that was actually tougher on China. Now, Mr. Stokes, does this sound to you like Trump was pursuing some type of electoral gain and putting it above the national security interest?
I wasn't in the room, so I can't speak to what was or wasn't said. I think in general, we shouldn't have any hostile foreign states or any foreign states interfering in U.S. elections, period, full stop, no matter if they're supporting Democrats or Republicans.
And of course, and if Donald Trump, though, was encouraging election interference, that would be highly obviously unethical and illegal as far as I'm concerned. But we know that Donald Trump has also used the power of the presidency for his own political gain before. Now, Mr. Stokes, can you remind us why President Trump was actually impeached the very first time he was impeached?
This isn't my area of expertise, but presumably Russ's influence in the election.
Thank you. And it's also true, if we remember, that Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, received $2 billion from Saudi Arabia for his investment fund after leaving the White House, just 2 months after leaving the White House. And these allegations of foreign interference of Donald Trump, his relationship with China, I think should be very concerning. Now, I want to show you this photo right here. There's been recent reports, again in the Washington Post, and Ranking Member Raskin and I have asked actually for an investigation into allegations that the Egyptian government may have sent $10 million in campaign contributions to Donald Trump in the closing days of the Trump campaign. And this raises serious questions, of course, about what Donald Trump has done, whether it's been his meetings with President Xi, whether it's been his conversations with the Egyptian president, and others, of which he was impeached for the first time, as to why he's trying to gain favors around elections. Donald Trump, of course, is resisting this investigation. But Mr. Stokes, do you think that the American people should be concerned about potential quid pro quos?
Yes, from any presidential candidate or former president.
Absolutely. And I want to talk about one other. We know that President Donald Trump also received at least $7.8 million from at least 20 foreign states and authoritarian leaders, including China, of which we're talking about today, in blatant violation of the Constitution. And I think it's important to remember that that $7.8 million is just the minimum that we know about, because we have a very limited number of the actual receipts of money that was going into the Trump organization, including money that was coming in directly from China. So as we're talking about the Chinese government and the Chinese influence, we have to ensure that we note the influence that China and other foreign actors were having on Donald Trump. So with that, I'm going to yield back and remind us that that's the investigation that we should be having.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
But I just wonder, Dr. Thayer, you've made a very strong argument.
A little bit of a different approach to this. Interestingly enough, I will say that our position on China should be one of bipartisanship. I will absolutely say that, and we don't find very much bipartisanship specifically in this committee. I think some of the concerns that I have, though, is just about the fact that we are not speaking more holistically. Let me explain to you kind of what I mean by that. One of the things that has been brought up has been fentanyl, and I appreciate the conversation around fentanyl because for so long in this committee, it has been put out there to the American people that fentanyl is only coming from the southern border, and the only reason we have a crisis is because of the southern border, when the reality is that China is playing a huge role as it relates to the fentanyl crisis. And so we've got to approach any of these crises more holistically. And the reason that I have a problem with this particular hearing, like some of my colleagues have already stated, is that we're not really talking about the bigger picture. The bigger picture is that it's not China as an isolated bad actor. What is really making and exacerbating this issue is the fact that China is teaming up with Russia, who is also teaming up with Iran. Is there anyone that disagrees that these three have actually started to work in concert together, and it's all for the harm of us? By your silence, I will say that you agree with me. And so I think that we need to be honest with the American people and talk about the dynamic of this threat, and that it is a lot larger, and that's actually what makes it even scarier. And it is why we do need someone that will lead this nation and will not just call out one bad actor, but call them all out, because they are definitely working together. As it's already been pointed out, not being able to say that we want Ukraine to defeat Russia, it's a very simple thing, but it means a lot. In addition to that, there is one portion of this world that I've traveled to most since I've been in Congress, and that is the Indo-Pacific area. And to go into places like Taiwan and to listen to what people in Taiwan, what people in Thailand, what people in Indonesia, what they are all experiencing as it relates to the CCP, it like hurts my heart. And so I do want to come up with solutions, because a lot of times when I'm listening to this, I'm wondering if they are talking about mobsters or what, because that's how bad it sounds when they're dropping off these bags of money. And then the next thing you know, it's like they own these people, yet we know that there's a lack of security, and we have to do our part in America to make sure that we are helping out these modern day democracies. But also we've got to be smart about our policies, right? Like our trade policies have to be smart, and they have to keep up, and we also have to make sure that we're protecting those here in our country, whether we're talking about from military attacks, or whether we're talking about interfering with our elections, or whether we're talking about literally our economy. And China somehow has their hand in all three of these spaces. So one of the issues that hasn't been talked about a lot is the tariffs, and the tariffs that have been proposed by Donald Trump if he becomes president of the United States again, and how those tariffs specifically have impacted our farmers. Mr. Stokes, are you aware of the impact that the tariffs that were imposed during the previous Trump administration, how that impacted our farmers?
Well, I think broadly speaking, the tariffs on the one hand are meant to be a tool to combat unfair trade practices by China, but on the other hand, they impose costs on consumers in the United States. So in many ways, we've got to kind of strike a balance, because we haven't been able to deal with unfair trade practices from China effectively, and this has been one of our most effective tools, but it does come at a cost for middle-class people, and so we've got to strike a balance there, and that's in general how I would approach the tariff issue.
That's absolutely right. And more specifically, when we went through this before, because doing the same thing over and over is the definition of insanity if we're expecting a different result. Farmers who exported soybeans, cotton, and sorghum to China were hit by Beijing's decision to raise tariffs on those products as much as 25%. Even despite Trump's attempt to mitigate his colossal failure by providing offsets and financial support for farmers, giving $23 billion in 2018 and 2019, he failed to distribute the support evenly to farmers, to say nothing that the support only partially mitigated the harm caused by these tariffs. And what is being proposed now is Trump is proposing a worldwide tariff of 10% and 60% on Chinese goods, which would lower the average after-tax incomes of U.S. households in 2025 by $1,800 and reduce imports to the U.S. by 5.5 trillion or 15%. The thing is, I want us to come up with policies, and I'm charging and requesting each of you, as you sit here and you have studied this, to talk about this in a very holistic mindset and give us some actual proposals that you believe would be bipartisan, where we can definitely deal with not just China, but Iran as well as Russia, as they are working as a collective to harm us. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll yield.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Burleson from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Thayer, are you familiar with an individual named Neville Roy Singham?
No, Congressman, I'm not.
Mr. Atkinson?
No, sir.
Mr. Sella?
I'm not, sir.
Mr. Stokes?
No, sir.
Okay, so, Mr. Chairman, I would like to submit for the record an article from the New York Times titled, "A Global Web of Chinese Propaganda Leads to a U.S. Tech Mogul."
Without objection to ordered.
So, Mr. Singham is an individual, as was mentioned, tech mogul. According to these articles, he has been financing groups like the group that is protesting outside this door, Code Pink. In fact, he's married to the individual who co-founded this organization. He's also been a contributor to many left-leaning Democrats, including members of this committee. So certainly members in this committee know who he is. But the question is, what is his involvement with China? Because so much of his philanthropy is funding groups that are sympathetic to the Chinese Communist Party. And so this is of concern. And you would think that it wouldn't result in anything, and yet, as this Times article points out, there have been multiple occasions. In fact, when the Committee on China was formed in the House, several of those members that received contributions protested the creation, in fact, rallied votes against the creation of that committee. There are other items that are listed in the article, and I would encourage you guys to read that. With that, I want to talk about, to me, this is an example of elite capture. Okay, so Mr. Thayer, let's talk about the history of the current governor, Tim Walz, and his connections with China. It is estimated that he has he's been to China and organized trips up to 30 times. And then he no longer started doing those trips. Then he became a member of a group while he was a member of Congress called the Macau Polytechnic University, which is a Chinese institution that characterizes itself as having a long-held devotion to and love for the motherland. Mr. Thayer, are you aware of Mr. Walz's connections to his interactions with China?
Yes, Congressman Burleson. Those incidences and his corporation, which was in existence in the 1990s and into the 21st century, the business that ran essentially educational exchange or brought American students to the
For over 10 years.
Yes, sir.
For over 10 years, he made numerous trips and organized numerous trips that were funded. My real concern is his connection to this organization, the Macau Polytechnic University. Can you describe that?
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Congressman Burleson, that he was a researcher there or a fellow at that institution in Macau.
During the Trump administration, one might think that this, there has been a pivot in the United States, but certainly by the time the Trump administration had taken office, the Trump administration started sending warnings to universities about the Confucius Institutes and their involvement, and many universities pulled those from their campuses. But strangely, the universities in Mr. Walz's state, while he is governor, are uniquely still having the Confucius Institutes. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, sir.
What is the concern and why could you elaborate on why that's a concern?
Certainly. Well, Confucius Institute is an aspect of political warfare. It's an institution which purports to tout the greatness of Chinese civilization, but it really is advancing the agenda of the Chinese Communist Party. My concern with respect to the businesses is that he would have to have a Chinese partner, at least one partner, or maybe multiple partners in the People's Republic of China, and would have to receive permission at the local level, provincial level, and at the central level to conduct business. And that certainly would involve contacts with the MSS, so with the Chinese intelligence service and with the Chinese Communist Party in order to conduct that business. To my knowledge, we don't have information about his Chinese partner or Chinese partners there. Additionally, of course, for MSS intelligence collections, having students come over, of course, allows MSS to have access to those individuals, which may provide a benefit for their intelligence collection in the future.
Thank you. My time has expired.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes the ranking member.
Thank you kindly. Just for UC requests. The first is an article from the Washington Post dated August 7 of this year. It's entitled, "Walls has a long history with China, but he's not pro-China." The second is from the Post dated August 8, 2024, entitled, "Walz's deep China experience is good for the country." Both articles conclude Walz's deep knowledge relating to China an asset and not a liability for the United States.
Without objection to order, I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. And just to go around the panel real quick, I have a few questions. I'm going to give you plenty of time to answer my last question. Everyone on the panel has already testified and agrees that the CCP is a huge threat to America and a huge threat to our government. Does anyone disagree that as we speak, the Chinese Communist Party is trying to infiltrate our government, various government agencies, and our political system in general? Now, I'm going to ask each one of you yes or no, and then we'll go into more in-depth questions. But is the average government agency aware of the threat the CCP poses? I mean, in other words, does anyone have confidence that the government agencies here in Washington, D.C. are aware of the threat? We're not even talking about do they have a plan to combat Chinese infiltration, but do you believe the government agencies are aware, Dr. Thayer?
Thank you, Chairman Comer. Not sufficiently, sir.
Mr. Atkinson?
Overall, I do not believe they are.
Our
Ambassador.
reporting is woefully not commensurate with the current threat.
Mr. Stokes?
I think the foreign and security-focused agencies, our intelligence agencies in particular, are very aware. I think the more domestically focused agencies, given that the